Volume 2 Chapter 32. Hecarim approached the entrance to the tomb. The sound of Heavy Masher's members rushing into the dark still echoed back to where he stood. Tenmu's footsteps were slower and more steady, however they were no less sure. Bastard didn't like being left out of our bargain, I guess. Well, fine, there's only one treasure we're after, anything else is a bonus. Hecarim reminded himself. Parpatra and his team, however, chose to be more circuitous. The many smaller teams of workers, however, simply rushed into the tomb, and thereby showed themselves as novices. With Heavy Masher and Tenmu in front, what have we got to worry about? Don't let them take all the loot. Cries like that kept Foresight standing to the right side of the walls while the overeager workers drawn by rumors of wealth went eagerly to their tasks. Most of them won't survive. Imina thought with a grim expression on her face, but then, most of them wouldn't survive anyway, but there's enough here for a military company or two. Why would anyone want this kind of attack? Unless they were sure they could handle it? The whoops and mix of barked orders over the sound of crashing feet and kicked doors were receding into the distance. The flickering lights of torches that loomed like suns when they were close, became flickering glowbugs as various members of worker teams charged down every path and toward every door. Excited cries came and redoubled, then redoubled again, then redoubled again. The sound of falling clinking coins and happy laughter echoed out through the dark halls. The cool air of the tomb brushed over their skin like the caress of a clammy, decaying hand. This way, follow the long hall. Imina heard the voice of Arch ringing in her head. Ignore anything and everything, touch not one single coin, not even to inspect it. When you hear cries for help, ignore them. Their trials are not yours. The half-elf stopped mid-step as the voice spoke to her. She felt her lover bump into her back. Watch it, Imina whispered without looking over her shoulder. You heard her? Robert Ike leaned forward to ask, the warmth of his breath wafted over Hecarim's ear, a stark contrast to the chill of the tomb. What do we do? Hecarim asked, is it her? Is this a trap? You're asking if this is a trap now? Imina whispered with a rough voice of disbelief just as the first screams reached their ears. Of course it's a trap, she hissed over her shoulder and crouched down to peer into the dark. Somewhere not far away, a crunching noise began as the screaming subsided. I mean, is this part of? Hecarim drew his hand down over the front of his face. Never mind, do we listen or not? The trio looked back and forth up their still line, faces searching silent words of wisdom through hard or shallow breaths, darting eyes and shaking hands. The smell of fear began to come from each of them as for the first time in a long time, they wondered truly, will we survive this? Yes. Rob Dyke finally added, putting on a brave, if wavering smile. If Arch were being made to trick us, at least she'd find some way to say so. Besides, we're already here, why lie now? Persuaded by their cleric, they began to advance. Priceless objects began to come into view through open, waiting doors. Glittering gold sparkled before Imina's eyes, and with her companion's martially enhanced senses, as well as her own, she could not just see, but also feel the pull of their bodies toward the gold and silver things. It was no less true for her. The wealth of kingdoms lay within a few paces. A whisper of temptation passed her parted lips when the corner of her eyes caught a golden statue of a woman's terrifying face with live snakes for hair. The eyes were rubies, the teeth were pearls, the scales of the snakes were flakes of emerald and jade. The artistic value alone made it beyond worth. What else is in there? What else is in here? Can't we just? Imina asked when she stopped to look. She felt her lover's hand on her shoulder, his bright eyes were pleading, and full of fear. Imina felt the greed slip away in the face of her lover's anxious face. Their breath became shallow as they continued into the darkness. When you reach the foyer, wait. And do not use your weapons. Archer's words rang in Hecarim's head, there was no questioning them. I will listen, come what may, he told himself. Iria was enjoying himself, a spring was in his every quiet step. A dozen skeletons had fallen to his sword without any bit of effort. His slaves walked with timid steps at his back. He could feel their eyes on him. He could feel their awe, he could feel their fear. It was moments like this that he savored, even more than when trembling thighs opened at his command. He knew that about himself, I am superior to them, and what's more, they know it now far better than at any other time, because I walk tall and strong, and they can only scurry after and let me lead. How can anyone doubt the superiority of humans when we are at our peak? It was a question he both savored and hated at once, because the very fact that he had to ask it meant that others doubted the answer. Imina. Next Elfi by, she'll look like you. He told himself and made a mental note to make sure he got a chance to work with foresight again when that time came. The treasures he passed by were eye-catching at the least: golden coins, expensive decorative armor, coffins overflowing with coins, and banners that were literally spun with gold. And yet for Iria Azruth of Tenmu, there was only one thing driving him. I have to get to the center, let the other trash fools dig through the stuff that's easy to reach. The best loot is always deeper in. A golden rule of ruin exploration, though he had little idea why beyond the notion that throne rooms tended to be there, which was as good a reason as any, he supposed. A piercing howl of pain reached him, scrambling feet so far distant that he couldn't have helped if he wanted to, and he never did. Master. There are noises ahead. The blue-haired ranger elf said in her usual timid voice. She looked down at the stone beneath her bare feet. Clad in nothing but the cheapest ragged clothing, they had no enchanted gear or armor to protect themselves, not even basic sandals. The clammy chill of the flow of air through the tomb seemed to stick to him like the saliva of some nasty, disgusting lizard. Are you sure? Iria demanded, his narrow eyes narrowed even further. The other two nodded without giving voice to their agreement. All right, their hearing is better, he admitted, and asked, what is it? It sounds like a woman's voice, and squeaking. Like she's humming music. The ranger answered, accompanied by furtive nods from her comrades. They clutched their hands together at the chest and tightly shut their eyes in case their master chose to hit them again. He didn't. Iria listened as carefully as he could, quieting even his breath, and they were right. He kicked a stray bone out of the way and watched it bounce and tumble with noisy, drum-like sounds of its own until it slid to a stop at the far wall near the door where the sounds were coming from. He drew his sword from his sheath and made his way forward again. The door was clearly open, resting slightly ajar, thick and heavy. It seemed to be made of one solid piece of iron. Between the gap and from the gap below, a flickering of many lights revealed that someone or something lay beneath. Iria flung open the door and entered as if he lived there. His face twisted in horror at what he beheld. The room was covered in pink ribbons, stuffed animals all designed to be so absurdly cute. It didn't fit anything he knew of dungeons: frilly lace, tiny puppy dolls and kitten dolls, like what a tasteless girl with an unlimited budget might have done. A fragrant scent of expensive perfume hung in the air as ephemeral as a single strand from a spider's web. The source? In the center of the room stood a young girl holding a small penguin wrapped in her arms. She was obviously squeezing it tight. More interestingly, the penguin was alive. Get me out. She won't let go. It wheezed out and flapped its flippers with frantic urgency. The girl had one green eye, mottled green gloves, a black and white maid dress with an almost metallic shine, auburn hair that hung loose down to her waist, a dark eye patch, and a blank expression. Everything about her was strangely cute, from her white boots that came up just below her thighs, to the tiny mouth whose lips were pursed as if she were disappointed and had just let out a huff. So you're my target. Surrender. It will be quick, the girl said in a short monotone. Iria held the sword out in front of him. No. Lead me to the greatest treasures in this place, and I'll make your end quick and painless. If it's worth enough, I might even let you live. So, you have chosen. Poorly, she said in the same cold monotone. She turned and walked to the wall where she then set the penguin down. That was when he saw an unfamiliar-looking device slung over her back. Iria flashed forward when her back was turned. I'll just take her head and be done with it, he told himself. A vicious little smile on his face, he could already see her head tumbling to the ground. Until he felt himself flying backwards with agonizing pain in his gut and his arms reflexively going forward to clutch his body. Pain shot through him from his front that made the thudding sensation when he landed on his back feel like nothing. He rose to his feet very slowly, his body shaking from both pain and fury. Names first. You do that, don't you? The girl asked while she took the long device off her back. He heard an unfamiliar sort of clicking noise as she fiddled with it, seemingly indifferent to him again. In duels with humans. But no matter what you look like, you're obviously a monster. No human would be in a filthy place like this. Iria spat and looked over his shoulder to his slaves. "Boost magic and heal me, you worthless trash," he shouted, and though they winced at his words, they raised their hands and the glow of magic circles emitted a moment later. Iria felt his body strengthen, his dexterity rise, and began to activate his martial arts. "I'll close the gap between man and monster and end this bitch." "I see. I don't like you," the girl said in the same monotone. "I made this room pretty, just for this. You are rude. We maids work hard. You should acknowledge that. My name is CZ Delta. Regret your rudeness in death." Iria snarled at her and attacked again, his body flashing towards her 3 times faster than before. Only for him to see the tip of her weapon begin to flash like glowbugs. The punches to his gut were like hammer blows. His sword held up, bouncing back and forth as he tried to use it as a shield and bat away projectiles he could barely see. But there were too many. She simply stood there. He saw her finger twitching over and over and over. And the pain in his body began to rise. His armor dented, cracked, and shattered. The rain of her unknown weapons projectiles began to get through. "I have to push through. Just bring my sword to her," and he struggled forward, the distance shrinking. A part of his armor shattered, and then he felt not a punch, but a tear as his body was pierced and flesh torn away from his forearm. It fell to the floor with a wet, sticky flop, exposing naked bone to the air. Iria grunted. He was there. He thrust out his sword, but the strange maid calling herself CZ Delta, spun on her heel faster than he could follow, brought her weapon into his already battered gut, and sent him tumbling back. His sword clattering and crashing end over end before it slid to a stop just in reach of him. Iria snatched it up and, aided by his martial arts, he shot to his feet again, breathing hard. The rain of blows from her distance weapon began to hit him again. The tiny projectile strikes tore through both his thighs, and then he felt his hands burst like pressed grapes. "Explosive rounds," she said with casual indifference as Iria stared through tearing, trembling eyes down at the bloody stumps. "You should not have been rude. It is not cute." "No. No." He mewed out. Injury was a common thing even for him, but losing the ability to hold his sword, that had never taken place. He yanked his head around as he came crashing to his knees when the strength of his thighs gave out. "Heal me. Heal me, you worthless slaves." They only smiled at him, sweetly, hatefully, and began to giggle. "No. No." They pointed at him, and began to laugh, and their laughter was like knives. "Don't you know? I'm better than you?" He pointed a bloody stump at the trio. "Do it. Heal. Heal." His shouts went unanswered, and his orders died in Iria's throat when he heard the tap of a heel on the stone just in front of him. "Neuronist can have you. We are done." CZ followed up. He spun his head back to the front and stared up at the young girl who now towered over him. He opened his mouth to say no one more time, only to see her bring the butt of her weapon up, and then crash down into his face. "Slaves?" CZ asked the trio, who stared down laughing with joy at the unconscious body of their master. They began to kick him repeatedly with their bare feet. They looked up at her with pitiful expressions. "Make it quick," they said in unison, and went back to kicking the unconscious blonde swordsman. "If you had no choice, you might be spared. Wait, and we will see," CZ replied, and this seemed to please the slit-eared elves, who went on kicking their former master, for quite some time. Parpatra was cautious by nature, allowing others to go in as if there was no danger. Even against skeletons, most of them won't survive. The ones who do, will become like me if they live long enough. The wily old man gave a chuckle to the scene around him. He checked for traps and had his magic caster look for illusions. At each tombstone he approached, he thrust down with his earth-penetrating spear. It pierced the grave, and with its holy tip, he sought to purify whatever twisted unlife lay within. The soft earth gave easily beneath his powerful thrust, and then he yanked it up a moment later. "Be careful," he reminded his team. "A place like this, it always has unexpected surprises." "That's right. It does," a woman said as she emerged out of an open doorway that led into the darkness. Slender and with dark hair done in a bun high up on her head, she wore glasses and a very clean, even perfect-looking maid outfit. She had a slender face and wore expensive-looking glasses, but most eye-catching of all were the enormous green gauntlets she wore at the wrists. "My name is Yuri Alpha, and you are our test subjects." She swept her hand out in a grand gesture before her, and following her arm with their eyes, they saw rising from the ground a slew of heavily armored skeletons. "You think you can beat us with these to help you?" Papatra's old voice was full of confidence and he puffed out his slender chest, his team closing into formation with practiced skill. "I won't be fighting unless I must. You will face the Nazarick Old Guarders by themselves. I'm just here to gather data," Yuri replied in a steady, even tone that was betrayed by the beginnings of a taunting smile she struggled to hold into place. From the darkness, at the maid's back, another maid appeared, clad in flowing robes and with purple hair. Her face, curious to Papatra's eyes, didn't move her when she spoke. "You're so childish, sister. Quit taunting them and get on with it," the smaller purple-haired maid said and covered her mouth with her sleeve before letting out a giggle of her own. "It isn't as if they have a chance." Yuri turned a little pouting look down to her companion. "Don't ruin all my fun, Entama." She rolled her eyes and gave an exasperated sigh. "Is she insane?" "No, that would stand to reason from their perspective. Those aren't humans, that's for sure. Humans wouldn't live here. Whatever they do, must be normal for them." Papatra thought before the maid simply shouted. "Begin," Yuri commanded. And the undead with gleaming armor, crackling magic hammers and swords began their inexorable advance. Gringham felt the burning in his muscles, the raging pain ran through his body to the music of his clinking armor. He looked over his shoulder, one of his teammates had fallen and was surrounded. "Help me." "No. No. Not like this." The slender thief brandished a dagger and held it up, shaking it before his body, but nobody stopped. A gout of flame illuminated the hall behind him and engulfed Gringham's teammate. The scream of pain caught up to his retreating companions even if he had not. "That's the fourth one. The fourth one. But they don't know how many of us there are. If I just keep going." Ahead of him he saw another flickering light, and heard more screaming. The light was carried out from around a corner, it was also bouncing like mad. "Another team, they're in combat, and they're losing." He realized, and the heavy masher leader realized almost instantly, if we go that way, we'll just get caught between both sides. His heart raced as if it wanted to compete with his thoughts, his eyes darted around him for something, anything that offered a ray of hope. What's with this tomb? He wondered, frustration and despair warring for control of his mind. A door caught his eye and without thinking, he ran for it, flinging it open and diving in. A few of his comrades made it in, but the rest who were looking behind them, missed what happened and kept going. Gringham did not open the door to call them, instead he flung his back against the door, was breathing heavily and turned his head to press his ear to the door, forcing his mouth to shut while he listened. The sound of tearing flesh, like ripping cloth, and screams, echoed and redoubled when his pursuers caught up to the part of his team that kept running, and whatever team was struggling around the corner. Then it was done. It was pitch dark within the room, except for one small flickering white light from the far side. "Do we go in?" Gringham recognized the voice of one of his rangers. "No. We wait, then we go back out the way we came, grab what gold we saw along the way. Leave this place, and never come back." Gringham replied with a whisper. I think I'm done with this," he added with the whites of his eyes wider than he thought they could be. "So, you're thieves after all? Even with your comrades dead, all you think about is taking what isn't yours and running away. I have seen a few noble humans, but you are not among them." The room began to brighten, and within it stood an old man in a butler outfit. Gringham of Heavy Masher was not a man easily frightened, and yet when the aged man in the formal suit bowed with a hand over his chest, the veteran worker could only feel a profound existential dread. The butler straightened up. "My name is Sebastian, and I am afraid you have committed 3 grave sins for which you must be punished." Sebos raised his hand and held out a finger. "The first is that you have attacked my master's home." He raised a second finger. "The second is that you abandoned your comrades, leaving them to die to save yourselves." He raised his thumb. "The third is that you sought to steal. If I were to add a fourth, it is that you made me lose a bet with a colleague." "Ah, a bet?" Gringham stammered. "He's talking. As long as we're talking, there's a chance." He realized, and held his hands out openly as if making an offering. "What if we were to help you to win another bet instead, double or nothing? Then could we persuade you to let us make it up to you? And your master also?" Sebos didn't respond, not with words. Instead, he changed. The old man was gone. The The body seemed to melt into itself as something else grew out of it, so that he was now 2 or 3 times his former height and build. Dark scales that were even at a glance utterly impenetrable. Sharp, hook-like spikes and protrusions thrust from his shoulders and head, and the hands were now tipped with razor claws. However, his gestures remained as formal and dignified as the butler who stood before them a moment ago. One hand came out, turned palm up and with fingers open. Sabos gave a half bow again and said, "I accept your offer. My colleague predicted you would make it, and despite our differences, I respect his mind, and out of that respect, if nothing else, I allow you a second chance. You may choose to fight me to the death, and if you are victorious, you will be allowed to go free. Or—" Gringham and his companions traded uncertain glances. Fighting that thing is asking to just die. He swallowed the lump in his throat and looked up at the black implacable face. Or you can kill one another, do that, and the last one standing will live. Sabos quipped, "It's that simple, I promise you." Gringham and his companions drew their weapons. There were 5, including himself, and of them, none are a real threat to me. Resolve settled on all their faces. This is about survival, it's nothing personal. Sabos watched with disinterest as they fell to hacking at one another, one by one falling to the floor, reduced to lumps of dead meat. Of them all, one still stood within 2 minutes' time, blood-streaked and breathing like he'd run a marathon. The heavy-armored Gringham went down to one knee, his heavy hammer falling from nerveless fingers, to thud to the floor. "You killed your comrades, and won your life," Sabos said with an icy stare. Gringham nodded, "Yes. Does that atone? Can I rest a minute before I leave?" "Leave?" Sabos asked rhetorically, "You're not leaving." Gringham's eyes shot up, "But you said I said that if you defeated me you would be allowed to leave, but if you killed each other, then one of you would be allowed to live. I will keep my promise, you will continue to live. I fear however, that you will regret that very much, as you spend the rest of your days in the frozen prison." Sabos replied, and with 2 long steps, he towered over the worker. Gringham screamed as he was dragged away. He screamed as he was dragged down the hall, as he was dragged downstairs, and as he was dragged into a frozen hell. The door shut behind him and was now alone, and around him, nothing but ice, snow and icy blocks. The warmth of his body's exertions was slowly drained away, until heat became a distant memory. He would never leave that room. When they reached the 4-way intersection they were told of, and finally stopped, Hecaran spoke. "Why do you think we haven't faced any opposition? Weren't we supposed to fight?" "Maybe you misunderstood?" Imona suggested doubtfully, scratching her ear. "Maybe," Rob Dyke added, "or maybe we're being led to the fight. We've heard the screaming, who knows how many are still alive? Who can say?" Whatever he was going to add, the cleric changed his mind and clutched his mace tighter against his body. Well, you came after all." A taunting, beautiful voice came from the darkness. "You remember me, don't you?" Solution asked when she stepped into the light. Her hands were on her hips and her chin was raised with an arrogant expression. "Yes. Now we came. Give us back Arch," Hecaran demanded with more courage than he truly felt. The buxom blonde brought a hand to her lips and laughed like he'd told the world's funniest joke. "I don't have her, I'm only to lead you to her. If you stay with me, you'll be safe until you get to the arena. After that?" She shrugged, "The rest is on you." "How do I know I can trust you?" Hecaran demanded. The woman looked flatly offended and drew herself up close to him. "My name is Solution Epsilon. I will torture, I will kill, eat, and consume any living thing I please that my master does not prohibit me from taking. But I will never lie. Least of all to an inferior life form with few redeeming qualities." Her hand came up and gripped him by his jaw. He felt the radiating heat threatening to rise and burn his flesh away. And then before he could even understand the viciousness in her bright blue eyes, and before his comrades could intervene, she released her grip. "Proof enough? I could have killed you then, boy, and chose not to. This hall isn't where it ends for you. Now shut up and follow, before my master thinks you're being rude." Solution spat the vicious words and whirled around to show her back to them as if to say, "It doesn't matter if you're behind me, you're not a threat." As if to further taunt the lot of them, the woman wore a maid outfit, and her skirt was slit at the thigh and all the way up to her hips. She walked with the sultry air of a woman leading a suitor to a bedchamber for a night of fun. Hecaran felt his team's eyes on the back of his head, but unable to think of what else to do, he followed. They passed monsters he'd only heard of, demons of wrath, elder liches, and bizarre creatures with many tentacles and strange horns. Yet nothing touched him or his team as they followed the curious blonde maid. If we hadn't obeyed, what would have happened if we encountered these things without her as our escort? Imina wondered, and did not like the answer. She still clutched her bow, as Roberdike did his mace, but her lover in front of her seemed disturbingly at ease. Like he's just given up and lost all hope, Imina thought. It seemed oddly freeing. His twin swords remained in hand, but nothing about his posture suggested he intended to do anything with them. It was a long, silent walk until a pair of maids came from another hall and fell in beside the blonde to chat amiably as if Foresight was not following them. The blonde maid treated the duo of maids very, very differently. Comrades, so, monsters can have comrades. Strange to think about, but that's the only thing that makes sense. Hecaran concluded just as the trio bade farewell and parted company, and in the distance a portcullis rose up and to reveal a much brighter area beyond. Just in here, Solution said and stopped at the opening, waving them on. Up ahead, there was erected a dark iron wall set in the middle of the sands, and to that dark wall was chained their comrade. Arch. The trio shouted and rushed past where Solution stood. They moved so quickly they almost missed the masked-robed magic caster who stood beside their bound comrade. "Stop," he bellowed with a voice of thunder, and held a gloved hand out over the forehead of their captive companion. In his other hand a golden staff of incalculable value snapped down to point at the trio in a gesture that could only be called threatening. The waves of sand they kicked up as they ran stopped instantly. Fear of what the unknown figure might do was visible on each of their faces and none of the three could even make an attempt to hide it. Then the same noble voice rang out, and the staff the mysterious caster held in his hand swept out in front of him. The bright lights grew brighter as the flames of torches tripled in size, illuminating a vast number of stone golems serving as stand-ins for an audience. "My name is Ainzul Gaun. Welcome to the Great Tomb of Nazarick." Volume 2 Chapter 33. Arch's eyes flew open as soon as the caster spoke. "You guys. You came for me? I knew you would. I knew it," the little blonde caster said with pride so great she choked on the emotion. Hecaran had no idea what to do. To fight a being that had a servant that could crush him was almost unthinkable. It was Imina who came to the idea first. She knelt, laying her bow beside her, bending one knee while the other bent back. She bowed her head. "What do we have to do to get her back?" asked Master Ainz. "Please. Whatever she has done to offend your mightiness, there must be some way to make it right." Prompted by Imina's action, Hecaran and Roberdike followed her initiative and did the same, laying their weapons in the sands while bowing their heads. "Please," Hecaran asked with the greatest humility he could muster. "She has sisters that need her care. They've done nothing to you." "Her sisters are here, for the same reason she is?" Ainz asked. "My lord, we, at first, believed them all dead. But then your servant told us otherwise," Roberdike answered, closing his eyes against his own regret at being so duped. The chains that bound Arch to the iron wall went taut as she yanked herself against them. "Please, just leave me. Saying goodbye to you was my final request. You're my friends, my only friends. I don't want you to pay for my mistakes. Just be content with a goodbye. Stand up. Stand up. Walk out of here. Our lives are over. Don't give up yours," Arch shouted at her companions. "No," Hecaran replied, glaring at Arch through teary eyes, their first moments running through his mind. "So you're a rich girl. Why would you be in a place like this?" Hecaran asked the diminutive blonde with the cheap staff but outrageously expensive clothing of bright green and gold dyes. "Because I want to be an adventurer," Arch answered. "This place is for workers, rich girl. Go use Daddy's pull to get you in there," he chuckled when Imina and Roberdike approached and sat at their table, mugs of beer in hand. "My father got me blackballed from there, so it's either worker or nothing, and I'm not going to do nothing. Just give me a chance. And my name isn't Rich Girl, it's Arch." "Damn it," Hecaran said, again snapped to the present, and he reached slowly for his swords. "No, it was my understanding that we could fight. If we could do well, you might let someone go," Hecaran said with sullen understanding that he would not see another day. Hecaran, just You don't have to do this, Arch shouted from where she was secured. Beside her, the magic caster raised his head to look past them. Solution. Is there anyone left alive among the invaders? Ainz asked. Nobody but prisoners, my lord, Solution shouted. Besides those 3 in front of you, everyone else is dead or wishing they were. Ainz turned his masked face back toward the trio in the sands. Do you think you can win? Do you think you can even entertain me? Ainz asked as if an ant had challenged him to arm wrestle. No. But my comrade is over there, her sisters are there. It doesn't matter, I can't just walk away with them in danger. Whatever she did. Even if she is to suffer for it. Even if I can't fight. Hecarim swallowed. Let her walk out. I'll take her place. The promise was ripped from his throat as if by hooks, and he shot from his kneeling position to stand and face his adversary. If a fight is worthless, then take that instead. I'll make my goodbyes, just let Arch and her sisters leave instead. Please. You've shown your power. I beg you. Show your grace. Hecarim asked. You want to trade your 1 life for their 3? Ainz asked as if affronted. I'm no merchant. But I know my numbers, boy. 1 life is worth only that. He held up a gloved hand. 1. I will permit Arch to leave if you will take her place, but her sisters. I'll stay too. Roberdike and Imina declared, though they remained kneeling as they made their declaration. As if to convince herself, her voice turned sorrowful, mournful, as Imina went on. My Hecarim is staying, so I would have stayed with him anyway, but if it can save one of my comrades' little sisters, fair trade. I was probably near the end of the road anyway. I am a priest, who would listen to a priest that would leave a child in merciless hands? Roberdike asked and snorted. That sounded less pretentious in my head. There. You have your 3 lives, we'll be substitutes for them. Whatever punishment she and her sisters were to suffer, we'll take for them. 1 life, for 1 life. That is what you said, isn't it, mighty lord? Hecarim asked. Words tumbled out in a frantic rush. Please. It costs you nothing. Play God with our lives and hers. Alter their fates. I beg you. Are you sure? Ainz asked. You have no idea what she's done, what tortures and horrible vials my servants may subject them to, and who knows how long they might go on. A day? A month? A year? Perhaps more than 1 lifetime. No. I still make the offer, Hecarim said. Closing his eyes and bowing his head, his twin swords fell into the sands from nerveless fingers. Hecarim, Arch shouted, Imina, Roberdike. You dummies. And slumped her head to sob. Their eyes were closed, those of Foresight's 3 members, waiting for the inevitable. Which was why they heard the noise first. A slow, but steady clapping sound. Hecarim's eyes fluttered open. The magic caster was the source. Confusion ensued and a radiant young red-headed woman with long braids emerged from behind the iron wall and began to unfasten Archer's clinking chains. Greater love has no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. So it says in the Gospel of Mark. The caster said, the slow clap an unfamiliar quote suggesting the impossible to the trio of workers who had just given up their lives. What? I don't understand? Hecarim said. He looked behind him to where Roberdike and Imina remained kneeling, equally open-mouthed, confusion on their faces. Arch stepped down into the stand and charged at them as fast as she could, diving into Hecarim's arms and giving him a supremely tight embrace around the neck. You did it. I told my master you would, Arch shouted. Her feet dangled just above the ground as she held on to the still dazed and confused Hecarim before planting a kiss on his cheek and dropping down to the sands again. Hecarim blushed and his mouth dropped open even further. Arch? Will someone please tell us what's going on? Imina shouted when she saw Arch kiss Hecarim's cheek. It was a test, Arch said and stepped back from Hecarim so she could see her team. She went on to explain her father and mother's debts, the danger that was coming, the arrival of Sabos, the sale of her sisters into slavery that instead had them delivered into Sabos' hands, and her own vow of loyalty to the one who had rescued them all. But the fire? Hecarim stammered. Arch looked behind her to her master. I didn't set a fire, master. Nor did I. Ainz answered. Arch bowed her head in a silent moment, then. It was probably my mother. She had her faults, but she loved my sisters and the thought of them being sold as slaves would be too much for her. She probably burned down the house with herself inside to punish her husband. Damn, Hecarim whispered. Arch then explained her training, the experiments that greatly increased her body and magical ability, and finally, Ainz's desire for loyal servants that were driven by more than personal gain. Lupus Regina chuckled. Master has a thing about talent. Without loyalty, the talent might as well not exist. When Arch finished explaining, she then asked, any questions? So, your sisters? Roberdike asked. Just fine, they're probably on the 6th floor playing in the lake. We got a little cabin up there, Arch said, and couldn't help but laugh when their jaws dropped when she casually mentioned the lake. And what about us? To this, we're not going to die or anything, really? Imina pressed. No. Master wants to offer you work, permanent work, give him your oath, your absolute loyalty. And everything you feared will become a distant memory, while everything you ever hoped for will be in reach, Arch said with an almost motherly warmth. She went a little over the top there, Ainz thought, but as a sales pitch went, it was persuasive. Over the top seems normal here anyway. He shrugged off the oddity of the world's tastes and trusted the outcome to Arch's expertise in her companions. So, why not just hire us? Why the theatrics? Why the Arch the prisoner routine? Hecarim asked. His entire body felt completely drained of the will to even move, and he slowly sank to his knees again. To see if you were worth it. The rest of your counterparts wanted nothing but to steal, several even abandoned their own team members to die. If you had touched even one single coin, you would have joined them. Ainz answered, this precious tomb's wealth is more than just wealth, it is the many memories I built with my precious friends. It's one thing to use that wealth to bring greater glory to it. It is another to let thieves dirty my home with their footsteps and rob it blind. Ainz took up his floating staff again and approached the kneeling leader. Standing beside Arch, he removed his glove and held out his hand. Kiss my ring and swear an oath of lifelong fealty to me, and you will regret nothing. Ainz promised. Arch, you know you're still going to get it for pulling this on us, right? Hecarim asked, and Arch had the good graces to bow her head. Yeah, well, Pandora's actor gave me the acting lessons to help me pull it off, and I really am sorry for worrying you all, but nothing less than proof like this would do, otherwise I never would have seen you again. Arch explained. Fine, but you still owe us drinks. Hecarim quipped, and Arch's face brightened. So, you're going to accept my master's offer? Arch's voice went up a few notches in pitch and she clutched her staff like it was the only thing keeping her afloat after a shipwreck. Yes. We came all this way, if your master values loyalty so much, values you so much. We've traded worse odds. And if Iria died here, that is just further proof that this is the right choice. Hecarim replied. You with me? He asked over his shoulder. Anywhere. The pair replied. Hecarim took Ainz's hand at the fingers and raised his face up to meet the mast the caster wore and said, Foresight, mighty lord, has always found its strength in mutual trust. More times than I can count, my comrades are why I lived, and each of us can say the same of the others. The words you recited a little while ago, perfectly say what we've always held in our hearts, even if we didn't have a way to say them. Arch would never have gone this far, if it wasn't worthwhile many times over. So, I'm not really the best speaker. But I promise I mean every word. I pledge myself, Foresight, pledges itself, to your mighty name. We will carry out your will until our bodies break and we can no longer move. Having spoken an oath, he kissed the ring of the Lord of the Tomb. The oath is made. Now we begin to prove you mean it, Ainz said and looked down at Arch, who immediately fell to one knee. Take your companions and have a drink. Then meet me at the room for their elevation. At once, Master, Arch said as her liege put his glove back on. Lupus Regina, see about the prisoners' fates and report back to me before we return to Riestais, Ainz said, only for Lupus Regina to ask. Riestais, Master? Not Carney? Ainz hesitated for a moment, stopping in mid-step. Hairs stood on end as he wondered if he made a mistake, but he adapted quickly to respond by saying, we'll revisit the matter of Carney when things have progressed further. I need to inform my ally that the Kingdom of Nazarick has just been given its justification for war. Volume 2 Chapter 34. The aftermath of the battle was frenzied, celebratory, and full of mourning. It was hours later that Lecruit and the survivors of the raid made it back to the village, and when they did, the worst of the cleanup had passed. The bodies of the fallen were laid out in a tiered pyre of stacked wood with bodies in various layers. Enri, Nfia, and the remaining Swords of Darkness members stood at the fore while villagers still bearing arms and blood-stained armor bowed their heads. The wind blew lightly as a mother's touch over their skin, as if the world itself wanted to offer rare comfort to the bereaved. It wasn't lost on Lecruit that the village fell into military lines. Did they do that on their own, or were they ordered as such? He and his remaining numbers fell into place off to one side as Enri began to speak. I've never been more than a peasant and a farmer, not in my whole short life. But because the outside world came to hurt us. More than once, I've been called to be more. So has my husband-to-be, so have common adventurers. So have all of you. Today. Enri held up the still muddy, slender golden crown that had fallen from the warrior who fled. We defeated a prince. They won't forget that. They will want to erase us, erase their shame. And make us forget that our dead ever lived at all. Today. On the fields of Kani, villagers became true warriors, and those who died, died to protect the lives of those they cherished. Say their names, while we send them to the skies and their ashes to the earth. Nfia, Nina, go ahead, Enri said and cast the muddy crown of gold on top of the pyre. Flame, Nfia said, and a slow and steady flame spell gouted from his hand. Nina did the same, and as the crackling of burning wood and the smell of burning flesh rose into the air, Enri saw the returned raiders and went to speak with them. I thought you were dead, Enri said to the ashen-faced Lecruit. Nearly. Britta sacrificed herself to buy us time to make it into the woods. From there the villagers with me guided us to safety. I guess we won, huh? So she didn't die for nothing. Lecruit swallowed the lump in his throat, but could do nothing about the trembling of his lower lips. Enri felt the urge to comfort him, but instead she did her best to focus on business. The prince claimed you failed before fleeing with his survivors. Before his defeat, he said that you all failed. No. Lecruit's voice became predatory, his battered and bruised hand came up in a fist. We screwed those bastards good. Burned most or all of their supplies. They may have run, but they'll run hungry. Enri took that in with a silent, thoughtful look toward the direction of the escape. We're going to chase them. Chase them? Lecruit stared at her, aghast. You're talking war? Yes. Nina picked up a lot of lessons from Luku when she was here. We can't stop now, we're going to push them hard. I've sent out my Wolf Rider scouts, the rest of us will be chasing them down and leaving 1 in every 10 of the army behind to protect the village. The prince. He's worse than we ever dreamed he was. Enri shuddered. Wait till you hear just what he has done. Lecruit did not wait as long as he thought. When the funeral had passed and the ashes scattered to the fields, Enri gathered her war council, with 1 extra member. A beautiful woman in a mockery of the clothing typically worn by lake ewes of blue rose. Lecruit, Peter. This is my sister, Tyr, Nina said with a broken voice that made it obvious she'd been crying. The little brown-haired magic caster held her sister tight against her body, one arm around her sister's shoulder, only relaxing to allow Tyr to look at the rest of the table. The greetings were muted and looks distant. Tyr looked away from them a moment later. Tyr, Nina said, I know it's hard, but tell them what happened, as best you can. If it will help. Tyr replied, and related to the table how the prince bought her contract from an 8 Fingers agent and turned her into his personal concubine, how he changed her name to Lakehughes and made her dress as the famed adventurer so he could pretend to abuse the real woman. When she was done, Lecruit and Peter got to their feet. What are you two doing? Nfia demanded when Tyr fell to sobbing into her sister's shoulder once again. The guild needs to hear this. We need to take her to Erantle, Peter said immediately. Yes, that. Lecruit snarled. When they hear about this, the scandal will be horrendous. Blue Rose are national heroes. For the prince to do this? No, this will help the cause tremendously. I wouldn't be surprised if there were a general strike by the guild. A strike? Enri asked. Yes, Peter answered in Lecruit's stead, refusing to take jobs for anyone who supports the royal family. As monsters are always a problem, and the guild is the only one who can handle them. That's as good as destroying some places. Then go, take whatever supplies you need, but make for Erantle as quickly as possible, Enri said with breathless urgency. But I want to stay with my sister. I don't. Please don't make me go, Ty said with a shiver. Nina nodded. I won't let her go with anyone but me. But I need you to help with the army, Henry said with a little frown. Then, my queen. My sister goes with the army. We're going that way anyway, Nina said with iron finality. But, Henry said, then looked at the pathetic, broken face of the blonde woman, and then slumped. Fine, she'll travel with us. You two go spread word at the guild, tell them the proof travels with the rebels. That will have to do, Peter said. It'll be fine, I'll make sure I tell them everything. It's not like they don't know us. Chances are they'll believe us even without her. Even if they don't, the rumors will spread faster than a flash flood, especially when, as promised, an army shows up. Lucrut punched the surface of the table. I'll get more arrows, and then we'll leave. Good luck to you, Nfaya said, and standing up, he thrust out his hand. Peter, then Lucrut shook it, and the two former adventurers said in turn, and to you. Then they left. When they were gone, the planning resumed until they were ready to march. Prince Barbaro wiped his face clean of mud and dropped his helmet. He kicked it across the ground. It bounced end over end until it came to a clanking halt against the armor of a soldier who had collapsed in place where they stopped. The golden crown he wore was gone, lost in the retreat, most of his banners trampled in the mud, most of his soldiers utterly lost. As for food, there was nothing but what a few quick-thinking soldiers managed to snatch. He was 6 days on the road back, forced march after forced march, harassed by wolf-riding goblin scouts that killed any cavalry he sent after them. The sickening sound of the wolves' teeth tearing into screaming humans and the dying whinnies of the horses unnerved the survivors, when finally a miracle occurred. Prince Barbaro knew he stank, and hated it. He knew he was filthy, coated with dried mud on his clothing. Nothing looked good. I'll have to completely rewrite this story when I reach the throne, he thought, grinning more and more broadly as he saw the advancing in the distance. Ha! Ha 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 ha! Yes! Yes! His brother's banner flew in the wind, and at its back was a force several times what Barbaro himself left with. On any other day, that would have sparked jealousy, envy, or anger. But now it was only relief. With this I can finish those bastards. They won because they kept an army hidden and outnumbered us. With these, it's at least 2 for everyone. With this, I can win, Prince Barbaro said, and waved with a bright smile on his face of the sort he hadn't worn for Zainac since boyhood. It's true. I swear it. Some of you met Nina, in fact most of you did, it turns out. Yeah, he's a she. Who knew, right? Lucrut said from his place standing atop the table. Murmurs of surprise and doubtful glances came from some of the adventurers and a few of the waitresses. It was a rough and ready crowd in the guild. Business had been a bit slow since the destruction of Zuranan's enclave, but that meant more time for drinking, so drink they did. Rangers, warriors, thieves, clerics and casters, all manner of adventurers sat around and enjoyed the peace, until Lucrut called for their attention and told them what happened at Carney village. So yes, the Crown Prince attacked to wipe out the place Sir Moman saved. And more than that, Lucrut said, and when he was done explaining Taz's fate, the sister of an adventurer, used to mock one of the most well-respected teams in the Riesti's kingdom, utter chaos ensued. Voices bellowed and fists pounded tables. Furious talk went against the royal family as Lucrut spun the story of destroyed villages and the survivors taking refuge in Carney, and he used all his bard-like skills to weave a tale of heroism among the villagers that fought back. The way the royal family's forces were annihilated, the prince routed, the new queen of Carney arisen and a vengeful adventurer turned general in hot pursuit, it stirred the blood. Einsack listened with absolute dread. I know Lucrut, he's an unprincipled flirt. But he's not one to make this up. Neither is Peter. And there's no way to be just mistaken. A peasant rebellion. What a thing. He approached the table where Lucrut stood winding down his story with wild gesticulations, telling about the death of Britta and how the former adventurer was mocked in death after her sacrifice. More than one head bowed in silent remembrance of the spunky, red-haired woman and the chances she had too often been denied. Lucrut. A moment? Einsack asked, putting a hand up on Lucrut's forearm. The range nodded, hopped down from the table with quiet deftness, and followed Einsack up to his private office. Einsack sat at his desk and gestured to the opposite chair. Lucrute sat without his usual panache, the look in his boyish eyes, dead serious and unflinchingly focused on the portly, round-faced guild leader. "Would you put your life at stake over the truth of what you're saying?" the plump guild master asked, and Lucrute did not hesitate. "I did that just by telling you all what happened, and yes, I promise, every word is absolutely true. Britta is dead." The prince renamed a forced prostitute of 8 fingers to Lake Hughes, dressed her up, and abused her for gods know how long. He attacked and destroyed several villages, and tried to destroy Kani, the residents of Moman. As far as I know, the prince is still retreating now, if Queen Henry Emmett and General Nina haven't caught up to him yet. "Everything, every word, is true," Lucrute insisted and placed his hands on the desk. "Do you doubt me?" Lucrute asked. "No." Einsack let out the breath he held, his heavy gut falling in regret. "I have to inform the other guild masters about this. We need a unified response to the royal family and all the other nobles. If we don't, for all we know, Blue Rose may leave the kingdom entirely. We can replace a stupid prince, but we can't just replace an adamantite-ranked adventuring team, and even if we could, this is an insult to our entire profession that can't be allowed to go unanswered." "And the rebellion?" Lucrute asked. "We stay out of that." Einsack shot back immediately. "As long as the guild hall isn't attacked, it doesn't matter what happens. We can't be seen as kingdom soldiers and we don't want to be tainted with distrust for rebelling either." Though, Einsack privately thought, if a few trash nobles were wiped out along the way by this, I wouldn't be shedding any tears of regret. Lucrute relaxed. No, I understand." The ranger tensed again for a moment, then stood up. "As long as you're not telling me not to tell others, it's fine." "No, I'm not. If anything, spread the fucking word," Einsack said and pounded a once mighty fist down on his table hard enough that from the point of impact, a spider crack radiated outward by several inches. "Will do," Lucrute promised, and made his exit back to the babble of the still dismayed commons.